One thing that readers of Seven at Sea wish there was more of, stories about the kids' perspective. And when we give our presentations and share our stories, or someone has read our book and they always want to know, what are the kids up to now? So today we have live in studio with us, firstborn Orton child, Karina Orton.
Welcome to the What Could Go Right podcast. We are your hosts, Erik Orton.
And I'm Emily Orton.
And here we talk about personal growth and sailing. In 2014, we moved aboard a fixer-upper sailboat and bootstrapped a year sailing with our 5 kids, and it changed our lives forever.
We tell the whole story in our memoir, our book, Seven at Sea. On this podcast, we want to help you go from fear to freedom, one adventure at a time. Welcome to What Could Go Right. We're so excited to have Karina here. She doesn't live here, but she's visiting right now. And so maybe we should just start by... Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Happy 2025.
One of the things that we love about Karina is that she gives us great advice. And I'm sure we're going to get some great counsel and wisdom on the show today. So thank you for bringing yourself and your brain and your heart. We love to be with you.
Package deal. And I just want to say that I did suggest the podcast title a while ago.
Well, what's the title?
What Could Go Right?
Oh, yes. The podcast title of the whole thing, not just of this. Do you have an idea for this episode?
We'll have to see how the episode goes first.
Maybe it could be like, I'm first. That makes me
That's
special.
what I was going to say.
I'm first. That makes me special.
That makes me special.
Special : first.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, we just spoke on a cruise ship and everybody there wanted to know, what are you up to now? Do you want to start with what are you up to now, or do you want to start with the way back sailing experience?
Let's do Where Are They Now?
Where are you now?
Well, I currently live in Minnesota in the Twin Cities area. I work at a tech startup app thing. I've been there for 2.5 years. And I moved to Minnesota as kind of a promotion, switching roles. And then right after I moved there, we went fully remote. So now I live in Minnesota, but I'm really flexible on where I can be. So that's like my main like job thing. In the time since living on the boat, which was 10 years ago, I went to BYU. I graduated with a degree in filmmaking. I did a bunch of film producing stuff. I did a bunch of different things around the arts, but it was all art stuff. So kind of falling into tech was unexpected, but it's been a good experience to learn, and it applies some of the strengths that I have. And I also get to learn a lot. On other side of things, I'm still exploring, and I don't feel this pull that I think a lot of my friends do, that I have to travel internationally all the time, or I feel like this sense of urgency because I've done a lot of international traveling. And so I want to do more, but I'm sort of like, well, I never lived in Minnesota before. Let me do the Minnesota things. And I don't feel like I'm in my 20s. I have to go spend a summer in Europe. Like, I've spent a summer in Europe. I did a study abroad. I've traveled with the sailing trip, and I've also traveled outside of that. So I want to do more. But the last few years between COVID and working this full-time kind of demanding job, I'm pretty much good being where I am and visiting family. What else? I'm reading a lot.
So you're having a chance to scratch that Midwest itch that everyone kind of gets at some point in their life.
Yeah, I've never had it. Never thought about Minnesota before the company I was working at had an office there. But that's like the work side. And then lately I've been, if you've read the book, it talks a little bit about my songwriting. And I haven't done as much of it the last few years, but I wrote a few songs this 2024, and I'm excited to dig into that more in 2025. So if you are looking for content, I'll be posting content.
We'll be sure to put some links in the show notes, right?
Oh yeah, you can, wherever you listen to your music, you should look up Karina Orton with a K, and you'll find some good stuff.
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty good overview. I think I'm following in the book. I talk about my favorite quote from this Catherine the Great book is, gradually guided by her own curiosity, she was acquiring a superior education. And that has continued. I mean, it's in my LinkedIn bio. It's kind of how I live my life. And I was actually stressed about taking this position originally because it seemed like maybe at odds with some of the other things that were important to me in my life at the time. And my mom was like, what if it doesn't have to be so heavy? What if it's not so intense? What if you're just curious about it? Like, what would be the most interesting to explore? I was like, oh, yeah. Okay. And that's part of why I decided to make the shift to where I am right now.
So cool. And I actually think in what you're doing now, it seems like you fell from film into tech, but there are some connections because you were working on the producing side, which was so detail oriented, and you had to know everybody's timelines and the process, and that's actually been super helpful.
Yeah, the skills that I gained in film school that were specific to producing are pretty applicable to any project or company or industry that has things that need to happen
On a timeline.
on a timeline
Within
with
a budget.
human beings. And so there are different nuances and idiosyncrasies and things that I am very much a rookie at in what I'm doing now. But the logistics piece is something that I've been having a knack for and an interest in for a while.
It's such a good position for a firstborn. Can you tell us about being the firstborn a little bit? I'd just love to hear your thoughts on it. I wasn't one of the questions. We're just throwing it out there.
So I feel like this maybe kind of illustrates part of it. I use this browser called Arc, and you can set little icons for websites that you go to a lot. So I use Google Calendar, and I set the icon as an octopus because I'm like, I want to have my tentacles in everything. I want to know what everyone's up to and everyone's doing, and like account for that as I make my decisions and as I plan for things. And so growing up, we lived in a small apartment, and you can hear most of what's happening most of the time. And I would be aware, I'd be like, oh yeah, you said that thing was coming up, or oh, why are you committing to that one? Didn't we say we're going to do this thing with this other person? Or what's going on with so-and-so? And I used to follow mom around listening to her phone calls and try to guess based on her side of the conversation who she was listening to. Whereas some of my younger siblings, they might have been in the room while we discussed something, and then a week later it comes up. And they're like, I've never heard about this at all. I'm like, you were in the room. They're like, I was reading a book. And I'm like, you can't read a book and listen to the conversation at the same time? So I think that there's a big piece of me just wanting to know what everyone's up to and trying to account for that as we plan. I also think it made me a little anxious. Like for a while, I was nervous about my siblings. I had like a nightmare about getting kidnapped, and I didn't want my siblings to run too far ahead of the stroller. I was like, once they're 10 feet away, I was like, Mom, that's pretty far. Like, I'm really nervous. So I think I feel sometimes that added anxiety.
Yeah, it can be a heavy burden to shoulder if you want to watch out for everybody. And I would say just yesterday, I started cooking something, and then she was like, I'll set the timer. I was like, I got it. And she's like, yeah, but in 3 minutes, you're supposed to be at a meeting somewhere else. And oh, you're right. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
So you leave, and I'll set a timer because I'll be here to take it out of the oven.
Yeah, I kept asking her, how long does this need to be in the oven? She's like looking for the recipe. I was like, whatever, I can just keep an eye on it. And then she's like, I'll set the timer. And I was like,
No,
you won't be here.
Everybody should have a firstborn in their family.
Karina runs a tight ship.
It's delightful. But speaking of that, actually, can we use that as a segue into the 7 at Sea experience? And there were some things that were unique to you and your role in our family as we contemplated and then entered into that experience. So how was that for you as the firstborn, and how were you able to sort of buffer or guide the younger kids?
I think leading up to it, I don't want to say that you guys didn't have credibility, because there was stuff that you talked about doing and did. But there were a lot of, I don't want to say false starts, but just attempts that didn't cross the finish line. And maybe it's like, oh, we're going to try and live with these gypsies in Wales, or we're going to go live abroad over here, or dad's going to take this job that's totally going to change our lives in this way. And most of those didn't pan out, which I think is pretty normal when you're trying a bunch of stuff. But initially, it's very fun to get excited, and it's very awesome to think about what could go right in those situations and all the fun that you could have. But sometimes getting carried away, or not carried away, but I would just get excited, and we'd all get excited. Then I'd also get all nervous, like, okay, well, we're going to leave our friends, and it's going to be so hard, and how are we going to do this, and start to think about all the scary parts of it. And then neither of them would happen. And it would be kind of like, it threw me into an emotional whirlpool, and I had to then recover, and it just was making me more stressed than I really needed to be. And so I kind of learned, like, hey, I can think that's cool, but I'm not going to get a super strong feeling about it either way, right? Like, yeah, I think that could be cool or positive, and I see some things to be concerned about, and I'm just going to keep a distance at emotional investment at this point, which I think sometimes can be really helpful and sometimes can be less helpful. You know, there's pros and cons to every approach when you take it too far. But as some of my siblings were getting nervous about some of the things leading up, you know, I started to pass that on to my siblings for every kind of initiative. They start to freak out. I'm like, hey, remember when he didn't do this, this, and this? I'm not saying that we're not going to do this, but like, save your freaking out for later. Let's like actually see the movement before we solve the problems that haven't come up yet.
Do you mind if I drill down on this whales thing? Because for our listeners, it's a real thing that almost happened.
Mm-hmm.
Before we do, can I ask, just to Karina's credit, when we speak and when you read our book, you will hear Karina quoted saying, I hear you talking about this sailing trip a lot, but do you really have the guts to do it? And it isn't coming from a snarky place. It's coming from the firstborn child who's been in the emotional chaos of having parents who are big dreamers and keep attempting and pursuing different things that, like she described, that don't necessarily come together, and just kind of the rise and fall and recovery of that for the whole family. And so fortunately she figured out, like, hey, until we have the plane tickets, don't get too emotionally attached. That's where it was coming from. It wasn't coming from I'm 14 years old and I'm snarky. It was like, I'm trying to assess what's real because you guys have taken me on some fake rides.
and I think that now I'm 27, I might phrase it differently. I might say it in a way that's a little bit more tactful.
I thought it was great.
But I wasn't trying to be snarky.
Yeah. Okay, so back to, thank you. Thanks for that. Back to Gypsies in Wales.
Yeah, because I think I want to lend credence to what Karina is saying. Because we got really close on this one. We were asked to consider going to Wales, where there was a group of gypsies that were living on a piece of land that had been purchased by somebody that we knew. And we were asked to make basically live with them for a time and make a documentary about their families and their background. And it was all pretty exciting. Like
to show them in a more positive light because of how they were persecuted there.
Yeah. And so I had arranged a leave of absence from work. We had gotten passports for the kids, and we had a place, like a destination where we were going to go.
We had renters for our apartment.
We had somebody lined up to rent our apartment, and it was down to buying plane tickets. It was kind of like, hey, we're all ready to go. Let's get the airfare. And that's when the person that was funding the project decided there were some of the people that were going to be in the film were in a car accident, and were no longer, they were, anyway, there was a kind of a cascade of reversals that meant that the kids were not going to, none of us were going to get on a plane to Wales. None of us were going to live in a bus with gypsies. None of us were going to be making a documentary film. And so that's a lot of reversal for us as adults, but also for our kids.
I mean, we did early birthday parties because we were going to be leaving.
And so I think that's the closest one. But we'd also talked about, what if we purchase this island on the Chilean coast and turn it into an eco resort, and we'll drive down there on a car sponsored by, that's powered by solar panels that will get sponsored from some company. Like
we did reach out to companies and did not get any sponsorships for solar panels.
So that's one that didn't really get close. But this is the kind of house that our kids were growing up in, was hearing these sorts of things bantied about, and how real or not real are they? Some of them were pretty remote. Some of them got quite real. And the sailing trip actually happened.
Well, I think we felt a little heartbroken after the trip to Wales didn't work out. We were really looking forward to living among the Roma people and getting to know them. And when it didn't happen, we started looking towards something that we could have more control over, because at the end of the day, that was all in somebody else's purview. We weren't the decision makers. And so living on a sailboat was one that, while it did teach us a lot of lessons about letting go, it was one that we could actually make happen.
We were in the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks for that little trip down memory lane.
I love
That's a deep cut.
Yeah, I love that insight. Okay. So we actually get aboard the boat. And like I said in the intro, people just want to know from the kids' perspective, like what it was like or what stood out to you. If it's easier to just say, like, here was an example of a really good day or a good experience, and here was an example of a really hard day, and kind of the intensity of the life we were living from your perspective.
Yeah, I think especially in the beginning, the kids were having a very different experience than the parents.
Let's say how old you were when you got on the boat.
I was 16 when we got on the boat. I was like 16 and a half, and then I turned 17 partway through the trip.
Thank you.
So, I mean, there's the initial, I think, if you've read the book, you hear, we all get there and we're like, there's a lot of things that are unexpected, and like, whose stupid idea was this? And it was Dad's. And the first night we couldn't turn on the stove. We didn't figure out how to turn the propane on. And so we're like, we had planned to have spaghetti, a warm, comforting meal, and we had to make peanut butter sandwiches after traveling down. I mean, it's like,
so
cry me a river, you're on your boat in the Caribbean. But, it was still hard for us. And so there's that piece of it that we all really experienced together. And then when Mom and Dad kind of went deep into this crisis mode management, like every single thing that came up felt like a new crisis to them. And we could tell that. I mean, you can tell how your parents are feeling. I just heard this great quote I'm going to share. I don't mean to call anybody out, but my friend shared with me a quote this week, which is, the best thing you can do as a mother is to take care of yourself so that your children don't feel like they have to take care of you. And of course, you all need to be helping each other out. You're a team. But that really resonated with me. And I think like we could tell there was a lot going on with our parents, and they would share some stuff, but they were just like, every day was an emergency and all day out visiting other people, getting information. And so we knew that, but like, we can't help install solar panels. We can't help fix the electric system or figure out how to do it or install a fridge, or we can't drive over the boat to fill up with water. Right. And so we're just like, I guess we'll fill in the gaps and make meals, and like, oh, Eli's upset because there's not internet. And I don't even know. I mean, it's been so long, I don't remember what everyone was upset about at the time, or that we were necessarily upset. We're fairly good-natured children. But just that, like, we couldn't necessarily do all the fun parts of living on a boat yet. And we also couldn't really help with any of the really hard stuff. We could come along on errands. I remember one time, and this is such a sad one. So we had some issues with losing our VHF radios. It was a sore topic.
You are in my house.
It is a sore topic, but we had one. We had another one that was working. I don't remember if this was before or after, but basically I went to shore with Dad, and I was just going to wait in the dinghy until he came back. And I felt kind of nervous because I'm in a little like tiny marina spot that I don't really know. And I don't know how it happened, but like I knocked the VHF out of the dinghy, and I was like, oh no, he's going to be so mad. And so I'm like, well, I have to get it. And luckily the water was like 3.5 feet deep. So I like hopped out, or like I got like waist high in the water, and I'm like feeling around for it with my feet and hands. I'm trying to get it. And so then like I was supposed to be staying dry in the dinghy, and then I'm like, well, now I'm half covered. So that's all we could really do, right? Is we could be encouraging and supportive. So that's very different. I think I'm rambling on that point.
Was that VHF waterproof or no?
It was.
Oh, sweet.
We would have heard about it. Like, I've never even heard that
really?
story.
I didn't know that happened either.
Oh,
so
well, I probably didn't tell you because it was fine, but it was never a secret.
for sure. But that's the kind of thing that kind of experiences that you were having, and you're like, our parents are not okay, and they're trying to take care of the boat, but they're not really taking care of each other, and they're not really taking care of us, in the sense that, of course, you had somewhere to be, and we gathered for meals every night, but you guys were really going through something big. It's something emotional, and we weren't there for you because we were freaking out on our own stuff. And so that must have been so hard. And this coming from a girl who, when she was very young, a toddler, would say to me, I wish I was taller so I could push the buttons of the elevator for you, or so that I could be more helpful. Like, I know you have in your heart a desire to help, and it's not your responsibility to take care of us, but I can see why that would be so stressful.
Yeah, and I think a part of it is like, well, we're just figuring it out, doing our thing. Like, we were homeschooled, so we were continuing to homeschool as we could. We didn't have the internet access that we expected to have. So some of the stuff that we had planned didn't really work out. And just imagine we were normally doing everything. And there's lots of lovely times sitting on the front deck in the beach. Like, it wasn't like a month of stress, but I remember at a certain point, and I think this is in the book, but I remember just saying, like, we kind of gathered together and we were like, so I know there's a lot going on and things aren't playing out how we thought they were going to play out as far as this boat and the exact route we take, but the point of this trip was to be together, right? And like, we could be together even if we don't have a fixed engine. And like, can we do something in between? And we kind of had like an intervention moment as kids and parents.
We're so lucky.
It was good because we were getting caught up in something that never ends, which is boat maintenance, and in our case, boat improvements. And it just was one of those things where, and I see this, people with homeowners have this happen all the time. There can always be something done to maintain or improve your home, and it can consume every hour that you have in the evenings or weekends where you could be home with your family. And that's what was happening to us and the boat. Is we were going through such a steep learning curve. And I love that you said, even if the engine isn't fixed, we can still be together as a family. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we instituted a few policies. We said the morning is the time for that sort of stuff. Boat maintenance will happen up until lunchtime. School would happen up until lunchtime. And
that was where we kind of divided.
Yeah. And then at lunchtime, we'd come together and we would eat lunch together. And then after that, we spent time as a family. Am I remembering this right? And as you commonly say, Emily, we put a leash on it. We could only spend so many hours doing school or boat maintenance, and then it ended and we did other things. And there was always more to do, but that's where we stopped. And we said, I guess we're going to have to pick it up tomorrow. And that was a good policy for us, I think.
I was so grateful. And hopefully, if you've ever listened to us talk about double return parenting, one of the things that a lot of parents are concerned about is that their kids don't talk to them, or their kids don't tell them what's going on for them. And I'm really grateful that we've had a long-standing policy of, what do you need more of? What do you need less of? What's going on? What counsel do you have for us? And counseling together all the way leading up to this trip. And we didn't call this counsel to order. You did, which I really appreciated. But the reason I think you guys, and you can tell me where I'm wrong, are willing to give us advice and counsel is because then we take it. We listen to you, we take it seriously, and we made some changes. And that made it a better experience for all of us. And so that's one of the things I think really works in the relationship, is that it goes both ways. When you ask us for counsel, we give it. You said earlier, I said, well, what are you most curious about? And you're like, I think I will think about it in that way. You chose to take that to heart, and it's often coming the other direction from you or from your siblings. And you'll say, hey, maybe a blind spot here, or, maybe we can still make this work. And we take the counsel. So
Karina, can you talk about that a little bit? The role of being in those conversations as a child in a family. I mean, you're not a child now, you're an adult, but I mean,
you weren't really a child then either. You were.
I've always been an adult. I've always felt like an adult from the age as early as I can remember. I always just felt like I was a grown up.
So just being in those conversations where we would confer together, and then, sometimes we would initiate that conversation. In some cases, you would. Do you mind just talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. And to be clear, I'm not kidding. I have always felt like a grown up.
This is something we're trying to address.
For those of you who remember Michael Keaton, this is Karina is the Michael Keaton of the Orton family.
So just a couple thoughts. One, before going into how it was as a kid, I want to say it's been really valuable as I have moved into a professional context, and I've ended up being involved in a lot of meetings and a lot of strategic conversations for the company where I work. And I was wondering why some of it felt so familiar. And I realized it's because it's very similar to a family council. It's not obviously 100% the same. Your own personal family is different. But I think that it's not something you guys would have ever thought of as like, here's how to prepare you for working in the, being part of the workforce of the world, right? Like, it has been helpful in that way. And I'm just comfortable expressing my opinions and discussing them with people of all ages. And part of it is where I work. The culture is facilitating that. But I will say one thing is that we always knew, and you made it very clear, like, this is not a democracy. We're not going to vote. We're not going to decide if dad's going to make this change for his job based on what you guys want. But we want to hear your concerns and your thoughts because it impacts your life. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think I think we pretty much all would share. I don't remember it being like one person would overpower it. I'm sure I spoke a lot. I'm one of those types. And maybe other people had to be prodded more, but we're all pretty willing to share if we have a concern or a thought, and we'd share what would be exciting or what would be difficult. And I think it actually makes you feel safer when you know what's going on, even if it's like, hey, we just got this big news and we're really worried about it. Or we're not worried about it, but like, we just want you to be aware, and we've got a plan for how we're going to approach it or whatever. But then you're not like, what are they whispering about? That's like, what are they stressed about? And not that parents can't have things that are private from their children, because they definitely should. But when it's something that is going to impact our family in a big way, I think it really enrolls us in the decision, and we're willing to be on the team. So I remember, like, even when we talk about first arriving on the boat and we're like, whose stupid idea was this? We're like, oh my gosh, it was dad's idea. And we were all on board. Whatever, it's the joke of the trip. Like, we really were, and we all talked about it. And I think Eli was probably the least on board because no Wi-Fi, and he kind of just got dragged along for a lot of stuff because he was.
Also, he wouldn't always pay attention to what was happening.
Yeah. No shade on Eli. I know he's an avid listener to this podcast, but at the time,
it was like 6 to 8 year old Eli.
Yeah. He was
had other interests.
Yeah. We weren't really Mario Kart, so what's to like?
It's hard to compete.
So I think it makes you feel safer, and it also makes you feel like you're a part of something, which is a real strength in your sense of well-being, and you can grow in confidence and understanding different things. So those are some, I guess, maybe some of the outcomes. I think sometimes I would get a little nervous. Like, I don't know what they're going to say, and that uncertainty can be scary for a minute. But then it would just feel good. I remember specifically, and when you were thinking about moving to a sales job, and we talked about it. So this is after the boat, and you had gone back to your job before the boat, working downtown in New York, and you were kind of telling us this, like, hey, dad has this opportunity to do this kind of work that's very unconventional compared to, maybe the majority of America, just kind of telling us in general. And we were like, or he can do this thing that he's been doing before that's pretty straightforward. And we were all the kids were kind of like, I'm tilting my head. It's like that like dog gif or whatever, where the dog like tilts their head, is really confused. Like, is this even a question? Like, do you know this man? Like, he's going to do the unconventional, wacky thing rather than the stable job. Like, I don't even know. Like, this feels obvious. Not that we didn't want to be involved in. Of course we wanted to be involved. And I think it helped us be really supportive. And you shared a lot about that experience being in the sales job at the time. But we were just like, huh? Duh. Like, why would you? Of course.
Why would I stay with a stable job with benefits and
when I can be 100% commission, no cap?
No cap.
No cap. That's a great example. Thanks, Karina. I'm glad that brings you comfort just to be in the loop, because you're right. I think there are some things that as a mother and father we need to keep to ourselves, and we don't want to burden you with stuff that can, maybe have a negative effect. But there is something very empowering about looping you in and getting your take on it, even if we're going to be the ones that are making the decision. One, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you feel heard, you feel valued, you feel considered, and then I think I feel like it increases your trust in whatever we do, because we've discussed it and we've tried. You can see that we've been circumspect about it, and so when we do move forward, I feel like you guys have been so super supportive of us. And do you feel like that's one of the benefits of this process, or is that am I just imagining that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it builds trust over time, right? So nowadays I don't get necessarily a full rundown of all the things that you're considering doing, and I don't necessarily need to. But I never thought, oh, my dad's this like crazy person who can't keep a job and whatever. I'm just like, yeah, he's always working on something cool. Like, you would share your reasoning for doing it and kind of how you'd weighed the risks, and I just was used to that. But if it's like, oh, this is causing all these problems for our family and I have no idea why they're even doing it, like that, I can imagine that would feel hard.
So just understanding the why behind it makes it easier.
Yeah, the why, and also kind of the process that you've thought about. And I will say that while you have come to us to counsel for things that are like, hey, we just found this out, this is pretty serious, you've, as I recall, never come to us in a panic. And so I would say probably don't come to your kids in a panic. Like, you gotta, even if you're feeling panicked, like, you gotta be a little more stable. If you're like, I'm not 100% sure, but I know together we'll figure it out, or like through these different ways, I know we'll find a path forward, but like, maybe don't panic.
Like, we can still set the tone for the conversation, whereas if we come in freaking out, that just spreads to the kids. Whereas if we say, here's the situation, we don't have all the answers, but here's some ideas, and you can see our calm and our evenness with it, and you're like, okay, I trust my parents, they're going to figure this out. If there's a way that we can be helpful, we will.
Yeah, and people are human, and it's not like you'll never have feelings or franticness about don't take that the wrong way. But yeah, I would say that would probably not be the most helpful approach.
I love it.
Wow. Okay, we're getting some good stuff here. All right, let's talk about, can you share one of your favorite memories from living on the boat? Fezziwig.
Okay, I'm going to share one thing that I don't have a specific day for, and then I'll share a specific day. So on the front of our boat, as you may know, it was a catamaran, and our boat specifically had netting, and some of the fancier boats that Dad takes out now aren't really like this, but this was just like a fancy rope thing tied together. It's like you could grip onto it, you could drop things through it, and this is like what's kind of connecting the two front of the holes.
It's the trampoline.
It's a trampoline, sort
grid,
of. Yeah, it's like a grid. There may be like an inch by an inch, so stuff can fall, whatever. So we figured out that we could tie our bed sheets to this part of the netting, and then when the wind blew, it would fill up under the sheets, and it created this beautiful, shady little like dome, perfectly climate controlled with the wind. And so you could be out and it's still warm, but that just felt like, you would dream of a moment like that. And we might do that if we were underway, or depending, you might do that also just at anchor or at a buoy, and you go out and read, or sometimes we just like hang out and, I don't know, tickle Lily. I don't even know. We would just hang out under those. And so that was a pretty magical experience.
So you get this updraft that creates a little bit of a dome, because you tie the corners down to the...
Yeah, all four corners.
And then you get the shade, so you can be outside in the shade, but you get all the breeze.
And you can look down, and there's just ocean under you.
Pretty magical.
It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. I would say I don't know a specific day it was, but one of my favorite places that we went is off of St. Bart's. And you might have heard that as like a pretty fancy island. Like Oprah has a house there, I think. But we went to this anchorage with our friends, and it was a mile walk from town. So you had to, like, people weren't staying there late and they weren't there super early because it was a bit of a hike. So we, being anchored there, kind of got the place to ourselves in the evenings and the mornings. And there were some other boats that came, but kind of it felt like we had our own little private beach. And it was really pretty snorkeling, and there were remors in the water. And I don't know if we did any school at that time or not, but I just remember like swimming to each other's boats, and our friend John let us try his scuba gear, and we liked it so much that we decided to stay longer than we had planned. That's one of the great things about traveling in this way is you can just adjust your plans because your whole house is there. So even though I got heat stroke on one of the days that we were there, that was one of my favorite places. It was just like really beautiful and peaceful and felt exclusive.
I remember the hike. There was this little tunnel where the tree branches reached over each other, and there were all these little, I don't know if they were moths or butterflies, but there was like once you got up the beach a little ways, there was on the hike this little butterfly garden, basically. That was a wonderful spot. I loved being leisurely there and saying, "Oh, we're just gonna hang out here because it's so nice." Yeah, we can.
Colombier.
Yes, Colombier.
I had to look it up there.
I was like, I know it's not Culebra because Culebra is part of Puerto Rico, which we also really liked, but they're just different places.
Yeah, Colombier, to be there as a family and with our friends. Wow, I'm so glad because people ask about questions about like any health issues or concerns, and I say the main most serious thing that happened was Karina got heat stroke.
Yeah, it was super weird.
And fortunately, the solution is small sips of salt water and resting in the shade, and we had plenty of both. But I'm glad that was still something you could enjoy.
I'm curious what your experience has been with people your own age. And, you've shared some of this with us, but for our listeners, conversations that you have with kind of how it affects making friends, having kind of grown up the way you've grown up.
I know something that me and my sisters do is we try to see how long we can go without bringing up living on a sailboat. Because once that comes up, it kind of can very easily take over the whole conversation. It becomes all about like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. That's so crazy. I can't believe, like, people are just kind of like overawed by it. And when I'm trying to get to know somebody, that's not really the energy that I'm trying to have with a conversation. So I know a lot of people have get to know you game frustrations, and they're like, I hate having to come up with an interesting fact or that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I think everybody's interesting, and I also have a lot of interesting facts to choose from. So I try to pick ones that are a little bit less impressive, I guess. Not that I'm embarrassed to talk about it. It's just not always what I want to lead with because I'm trying to be connecting, and it's often the kind of experience that people can't relate to, or at least the way that it initially comes off is as something that you can't relate to. And I think Allison, I don't know if this is in the book, but Allison wrote a song about this called It's Like I Went to Mars. Like, it's like I went to Mars and you weren't there. It's like, it's very catchy. I remember it, but we couldn't really explain to our friends from home what it was. And we had some friends visit and they could kind of get some of it. And it's not like there's no proxy experiences that people can relate to, especially as you get older, as people have done more traveling or been in more diverse sets of places. But it can be actually sometimes a little bit of a challenge when you're trying to be finding common ground.
Yeah, it others you.
Mm-hmm. On the flip side, I feel like a lot of confidence in, and it's not that I didn't have this before, but definitely my experiences on the boat expanded on this, talking to people with all different backgrounds and ages, and also just feeling really comfortable being in different cities or places. I'm like, oh, we'll figure out how to be here and how to get food. And then so that piece of it, when you're in a new place with other people, obviously you can, like I said, for other things, gain that confidence through other means. But for me, a lot of it came from just figuring out different stuff on the boat. And so, yeah, just knowing that I can get along with a lot of different kind of people, and through socioeconomic ranges and through age ranges and through cultural ranges, there's probably something we can talk about.
So as we start to wrap up, I'm curious, most of the people that listen to our podcast are probably not in their late 20s. Would you say that's safe to say, Emily?
Mm-hmm.
So there's probably more parents listening to this than, your peers. Do you have any thoughts or advice for parents of adult kids or kids that are, older kids that might be helpful for them as they navigate whatever challenges or opportunities they're coming up against in their own journey?
I think that a lot of kids are having a different experience in early adulthood than their parents did. I know, for example, like people are getting married later. For example, I'm single, and you guys don't know what it's like to be single at 27. You just don't. And you can empathize and you can relate. But I think just like acknowledging that it's not the same as when you were kids. I know there's a lot of memes on the internet about like buying a house is so much harder than it was then. And I know you guys we were renting in New York, so you didn't have the same experience, but a lot of people just are in a financially different situation, or careers are different. Like it's very common to switch careers more often and not really do one thing for 40 years as it was when maybe a lot of people who are parents, I know that parents are many ages, right? It's not just one set, but just within that, like I love my grandparents and I know they do not understand really what I do for work. And if you're listening to this, Grandpa, I still love you, but it can be hard to wrap. Even my friends don't really understand because it's kind of nebulous. But I think just that as one piece, and kind of on that, something that we've been talking about recently, my mom, is acknowledging that it's really normal to feel those ways. Like whatever somebody's feeling, you might not think it's like the most realistic or the most reasonable or the most helpful response, but be like, that totally makes sense why you feel that way. I remember I've historically struggled with jealousy a lot. And there were some times when my mom was like, but don't you just see how this is hurting you? And don't you but it's not that way. And it's not about you. And I was like,
I was not helpful.
I was like, I don't feel better and I don't feel heard and I don't, and it's fine. I've, that's just an example.
We've talked.
Not like a casting stones at anyone's feet, but just that just because it wasn't nothing that you struggled with or you don't understand why. I think that's just human relationships in general. And I think your kids want to cheer you on in your endeavors. And so much of a lot of people's parenting is, I want to make things better for my kids, which is awesome. But especially once your kids are out of the house, they still want to talk to you. Like my mom's busier now. I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you not like always available for me to answer the phone whenever I have a moment free? So one, I think still be available. And two, like your kids want to see you doing stuff and they want to support what you have going on. And they think it's cool if you're writing a book or going on a trip or going after that stuff that you care about. And maybe the stuff you care about is more, I don't want to say quotidian.
Because
most people won't know what that means and I'm being obnoxious. No, but like, I don't think it's good or bad to like something that's more unconventional or adventurous. I think the point is just choosing it and not doing it because everyone else is doing it. And so if this thing that all of your friends like is what you also like, cool, do it. If that's what all the retired people do, cool, do it. And you like that, sure. But if you are just doing it because that's what is done, maybe take a second to do some inner reflection.
Awesome. Thank you, Karina. Emily, before we wrap up, anything else that you want to ask Karina while we've got her?
Yeah, there is. If the family was considering a similar adventure, what advice or insights would you offer to the kids involved? I know a lot of parents will be curious what you have to say about this.
And then I have one last question for you. So
this is only the penultimate question.
Brace yourself for the next vocabulary word.
I think one piece is make friends as soon as you can. I think that's one of the things that we really learned was we kept waiting to make friends with other kids because we're like, we're not going to be here that long. And maybe sometimes if you've gone to another place not on a boat, you're like, well, we're only in town for a week. We're not really going to get involved in the community. But if you're on a boat, you could be in town for 2 days and make friends for life. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't realize that. None of us realized that. So I would say that's one piece of advice, just like practically for the kids and everyone, even if you don't, super click and become friends for a long time. It's an afternoon. People are nice. You'll have a fine time. Like the stakes are pretty low. I think kind of to the counseling point is share with your kids and say like, these are the places that we're looking at. What kind of stuff are you interested? If your kid's really interested in the history of soccer and you're going to go to Brazil, like what can you learn about that? Or if your kid is really interested in biology, get them a book on fish. Like no one in my family, none of the kids are like big into science. So we didn't get really into that, but just I think like you can offer suggestions or recommendations based on things that they're interested in, but also just kind of like be willing to explore with them. If they're not feeling that excited, say like, how can we enroll you in this? If like I don't know, if you really like to climb trees, like there's lots of cool kinds of trees to climb there and kind of, it's like anytime you're talking to a stakeholder for a project at a company, right? You're like, what's important to you and how can I frame this in a way that's important to you? And so if you know what's important to your kids, you can position the trip in that way. And I think not in a manipulative way, but just for them to see, here are the things that I could get excited about. And here's the things that I could learn about. And like, oh, these are the islands we want to go to. Kind of even with that or separately, but just like, we want to go here. Let's look up pictures. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, look, they have a cute cafe. It'd be fun to check that out. Oh, can you imagine trying that gelato? Like there's things like that you can do to help it become real and exciting to your kids.
Awesome. I have another question, unless you have something, Emma. Everyone always asks us, do you think your kids will move on to a boat? I don't know the answer. What would you say for you?
I don't think I am a good enough sailor to captain a boat presently. And I don't like have this love for captaining a boat as much as I like to be in charge of things. I'm like, somebody else can sail. That's fine. So I don't think I have a plan to do it personally, but I'm not opposed to it. I don't think right now I would want to do it by myself. But if in the future, when I have a family, that's something that was coming up, I would be up for it. I would have a lot to learn because I wasn't involved in all of the nitty-gritty details and crises to the degree that you guys were. Like I don't know how to do that stuff.
I'd be there for you.
But I know I could learn if it became important to me. But I think in general, we have all, I'll speak for myself mainly, but among my siblings have an interest and a comfortable, like a level of comfort with nomadic traveling and being in new places and living internationally and doing things that are unconventional. So boats, I don't know, but maybe similar or adjacent experiences. I think we all have some of those in mind.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share that we haven't asked about?
Here's your big chance. No pressure.
Under pressure. One of the questions on your little prep potential things to think about was things that I've carried from that trip into my life. And I think one of them, I think that if I hadn't gone on this trip, I would have been a lot more uptight in my life. I think I'm naturally inclined to like type A type things. Even though I have bad handwriting, everything else is pretty like, I'm organized. I like to do like a semester microphone. Like in college, I did like calendaring by the semester and stuff like that. But I think it really made me practice letting go of things and letting go of plans and expectations. And that doesn't mean becoming passive, but I think that means being willing to pivot and adjust quickly and say, okay, this is what's happening now. Or, oh, this thing fell through that we weren't expecting. And so I just, like, I work at a startup and things are changing a lot. And I think I am much more suited to it than some of my friends are because they've had different experiences. And I'm able to handle kind of the quick changes or the more dramatic shifts in a way that someone who I just think I would have been a lot more rigid if I hadn't had those kind of experiences earlier on. And the other thing I think that I've learned continually is this concept we talk about called it will emerge, and how sometimes you have to set your course to that thing, and then as you get closer, it will come clear. Maybe, it's good to have really detailed plans and goals. And also sometimes you're like, I know I want to go in that direction. I don't really know all the pieces and what's going to unfold, and that's okay. And I'm just going to face that way. And as I move closer, more things will become clear. And so I think we obviously experienced that literally in sailing towards islands that were over the horizon. And figuratively, I experienced that a lot myself. And for all that I like to know stuff, because we kind of started out with me talking about how much I like to know about everything that's going on and what's everyone's plans, I'm also able to say, we'll figure it out and it'll become more clear, and I'll cross that bridge when I get there and be calm about it.
I love it. I'm going to let Mom have the last word, but I'll just say one of the things that has gone right in our life is having you.
Oh,
100%. I think I would have said the same thing. And I think all of our listeners can tell just how lucky we are and how our kids become a superpower in our life. We're so blessed and so fortunate to just have these relationships. Our kids definitely make us better. And we're so grateful for you. And we're thankful that you came out to visit us. And we're thankful that you came into the studio and we can record this and keep it. And we're just excited about all the things that are continuing to unfold in your life. What could go right?
Hey guys, it's Erik. Before we sign off, I just want to give you the sailing update. For those of you that are interested in sailing with us sooner rather than later, we do have a couple of last minute spots that have opened up. A couple of people have had to shift around. So we're going to be in the British Virgin Islands March 10th through the 15th. This is 2025. And one couple has had to move to another trip. So their loss is your gain. But if you want to come March 10th through the 15th, we do have spots for 2 people, 1 cabin. Also, we're going to be in the Bahamas March 31st through April 5th. We have a couple of cabins open. So if that works for you, we're going to sail in and out of Nassau, sailing the beautiful Exuma Islands. If you want to sail with us a little bit further out on the calendar, June 7th through the 14th, we're going to be in Italy. All these next trips are in Europe, in the Mediterranean. Italy, Naples, beautiful spot, June 7th through the 14th. Greece, sailing out of Athens, July 19th through the 26th. Croatia, a town called Split. We're going to discover it together. I haven't been there before. So August 2nd through the 9th. So you can hop on one of our spring trips to the BVI or the Bahamas, or you can join us in Italy, Greece, or Croatia. Just shoot us an email, hello@theawesomefactory.nyc, or ping us on social media, DM us, and we'd love to hear from you and hopefully welcome you aboard.